Dr. Ings, you're on. Go ahead.
Hello, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome on this June 13th to our June 13th symposium. Of course, today is the 41st anniversary of the death of Dr. Walter Rodney, renowned Guyanese, Caribbean, and African scholar activist, better known in Guyana for his membership in the Working People's Alliance. It's been 41 years since his assassination, and all over the world where people know of him, there have been tributes and commemorations. And of course, on this channel, we have had our fair share today. I was on Hindsight earlier today. We had lots of activity leading up to today with the announcement in Parliament by the Attorney General that the government of Guyana intend to take certain measures in relation to Walter Rodney. We had the responses from the WPA, which put out two statements, a statement in response to the announcement by the Attorney General and then the June 13th statement. We close off today on this channel with a symposium by the Working People's Alliance to discuss an issue that has been in the news over the last year, and that is the gas to shore pipeline. In the spirit of Walter Rodney, we think that this is a topic that is worth exploring because it has to do with our newfound oil wealth and what to do with it. What should we spend it on? This gas to shore pipeline has been at the center of the policy proposals by the previous government, and it has been embraced by this government. The question before us is whether this project is a necessary project. Should we go ahead with it? What are the benefits? What are the downsides? Well, we'll seek answers to those questions today from our panelists. Dr. Professor Clive Thomas, a colleague of Walter Rodney, long before the birth of the WPA, and himself, Thomas, an economist, perhaps the top developmental economist of his generation. He's known not just in Guyana, but across the Caribbean and across the world. And he would be weighing in on what to do about the gas pipeline. What are the questions? What are the answers? What are the upsides, the downsides? And then we have former Minister David Patterson, who was Minister of Public Infrastructure under the coalition government, a member of the executive of the AFC. And he was integrally involved with this project. I think he moved the motion through Parliament, or introduced the motion in Parliament as it relates to the pipeline. So we have two people, Professor Thomas, who was written on the subject. If you check this morning's Stabroek News and last week, you would notice that he dealt with this question of the pipeline. And so we start today. Welcome to the audience. I notice a number of you are here already. And so we want to start with Professor Thomas, who will speak for the first part of the program. It's a symposium, so what we'll do is Professor Thomas will make his presentation, and then Minister Patterson will make his presentation, and then we'll take questions. I will try as much as possible to get your questions from the audience, and then I will have some questions of my own, which we will put to the panelists. So let us welcome those of you in the audience. Please share the link. Let everyone know that this program is on. It's sponsored by the Working People's Alliance, the party to which Walter Rodney belonged, and it's been streamed there on CAMS TV. CAMS TV. And we thank CAMS TV for giving us the opportunity to stream this program here this evening. So let's start with Professor Thomas. Professor Thomas, good evening.
Good evening, David. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. And before you get into your presentation proper, any short reflections as we remember Walter Rodney 41 years on?
Well, what I'd like to say is that I would imagine a symposium like this would be exactly what he would want, because he was not only an activist at the level of grassroots political work, but he's also an intellectual activist, trying to develop ideas and new ways of seeing and interpreting the social and economic and political realities of Guyana. So I think a symposium like this speaks very much to the tradition that he represents. Because as I will advance when we start, this pipeline is the second largest national expression of how we intend to spend the windfall or revenues that we anticipate with the 20 discoveries that we've made to date. The largest is about $350 million sitting idle in the Federal Reserve Bank, earning rates of interest at about 1/10, 1%, as I told you the last time you were here. And this one is projected to be out with $1 billion. So these are the two largest commitments, concrete, express commitments made by the authorities about how we can spend the money. So I think it's important in that respect for us to evaluate it from that standpoint. Because right now the country is faced with a lot of economic problems. We have a pandemic, we have exceptional floods, never before seen. And in the midst of this, we still have that money, as I would say, sitting in the Federal Reserve System, only 0.01% per annum. We have a project that is going to spend about $1 billion. And we also have the emergencies that come with not having enough people vaccinated, without completing enough support and giving comfort and some amount of succor to their households who are finding it difficult because of the pandemic and now the floods added to that. So I don't think we can imagine any more greater emergency facing poor people. And so I want us, in a sense, in this discussion to evaluate the use of the funds from that point of view, from that perspective, because it's not money just sitting there idle. It's money that we know can be spent to deal with issues of poverty and so on. And we are, in fact, I know, trying to treat this program as a lead into the discussion about cash transfers. So I want to situate it also in that context. So those were my introductory remarks, and I hope it's in keeping with the spirit of what you intend in the program.
Yes, certainly. And I couldn't agree with you more when you said that this is perhaps a very appropriate way in to honor Walter, to remember him, because he was not a narrow thinker. He was not. His was not a narrow praxis. It was the broadest praxis one can think of, and it was in keeping with the demands and the imperatives of his own generation, a generation to which he belonged. That one coming out of slavery and a plantation society, that one had to, by definition, embrace a praxis that was broad. Do you agree with me, Dr. Thomas?
I agree with you completely. Because in our generation, even you might remember, because you were at the university age around that time, poverty was our main target because that's where we consolidated our understanding of the poor and the powerless. They were poor because they were income poor. They didn't have money. They might have had a richness of spirit and of intellect and all those things, but that was potential. They just didn't have money. So income poverty was the basic scourge that flooded our land. So he was, I would think, a serious advocate for eradicating poverty. And that is why I think that is in the spirit of Walter Rodney that we've committed to the ideal of cash transfers and removal of poverty as a priority for spending the windfall revenues we'll get from oil. That is why I'm personally very uncomfortable with people who try to poo-poo or try to play down doom and gloom the wealth and riches of the size of the windfall revenues we expect to get. Because make no doubt about it, those revenues are in billions and billions of US dollars. They've been estimated by studies done in a similar way for every oil producing country in the world. Why should we think the ones done in Guyana are fraudulent? And yet quoting those other studies to say we're not doing as well as them. I mean, it is almost a calculated attempt to deny the reality in Guyana. And I try to pile this with you and our reflections at our various meetings as similar to what's happening in the United States. You know, a more almost insidious subversion of truth and make believe now has become the practice of the land. How could we say, sit down and say, for example, close down the potential to get rid of poverty in Guyana and shut it down because we are after the altar of trying to prevent and the environmental destruction for the globe? And we will be a tiny producer of that. I agree we need to have environmental responsibilities, but we can't put on the back burner the poor and the powerless in Guyana. And that is what they're calling for. So we have to tell them what it is.
Thank you very much, Professor Thomas. And your own book, which was published in the 1980s, The Poor and the Powerless, it is still relevant. It was one of two books that you published in the 1980s. The other one was The Rise of the Authoritarian State in the Periphery. I know the year 1984, and I think The Poor and the Powerless was 1989.
88.
88. So I was one off. And as you said, for us activists and students, those were required texts as we engage the political economy of our country and our region. Welcome to all of you, Michelle Semplo, Marla Alicock, Michelle Burke, Yvette Ann, Sherry Hunge, Sherry Hunge, Oswin from Arizona. We have Keith Branch. Some of the people I'm seeing who are on with us, GT Black Gold, one of the regulars, Oswin King from Arizona. We have Dave, Nicole Ross, Robert London, and people from all across the globe in Guyana, of course. Welcome to this symposium. Professor Thomas, let me have you go now straight into the meat of your presentation.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, so let me start with the obvious. This program has really come to light and has been the primary focus, the most concrete expression of what the 2021 budget that the government put to the parliament is claiming it would do. And it's doing that because it argues that the biggest impediment to the development of Guyana at this point in time is the lack of cheap energy that could revolutionize our manufacturing capability, our agricultural work, our household work, the services that we provide. And the central function of the Gas to Shore project is to find a means of being able to produce an energy mix in the country that will satisfy the removal of that impediment. So that Guyana will no longer be based on the discoveries we've had so far, and there be 20 of them, of over 10 billion barrels at this point in time. But that would no longer be a major impediment to the development of the country. So affordable energy is the primary thrust. And the proposal of the project seeks to upgrade the levels of utilization of the gas. Because the natural gas that comes along with the petroleum, there are three options that exist for it. The companies can bury it, that is return it back to the earth. They can burn it, that flare it, as we know, and then they get a lot of environmental pollution and a lot of complaints about that. Or they can seek to monetize it. Guyana is seeking to find a way of trying to monetize it. But as I will try to show you, the means by which the government is seeking to do that guarantees ExxonMobil, that is the producer of the associated gas that they intend to use and to transport by the pipelines, with a guaranteed income situation where all they have to do is to extract the gas at a markup at no risk to them, and that markup can be whatever they determine, as long as it stays within the limits of the price that the government is hoping to keep under the price that they currently pay for using heavy fuel oils at the electricity plant right now. There are, I think, about 6 independent issues which we should consider. And I just list them, and we can go into them as the program expands. The first issue I think that we have to recognize is that the government has claimed that the studies for this project were conducted by the previous coalition government and they left them idle. They were conducted largely between the period 2017 to 2019, and the main financing agency for those studies was the Inter-American Development Bank. Although the bulk of the studies were done between 2017 and 2019, one of them, the one done by Japan, was in fact only completed April this year, a couple of months ago. These studies are not feasibility studies, as you term them. These studies are what we would call pre-feasibility studies. And I will confess that when I was working as the director with the SARA agency, the government had appointed me to a committee which was meeting regularly under the auspices of the same minister we're waiting on, Patterson, to as it were, technically monitor the production and the work of these committees, these research consultancies. So I can say with some amount of confidence that they were pre-feasibility studies. There are studies to guide the government of what sort of energy mix they should aim for, but they're not this type of study that the government can move to immediately set up a project and run with it, because it does not have the fine details that are required for a project study where it's going to be implemented within a matter of a year or two. And with that caution, I just let you know that those studies represent, therefore, the thinking behind whatever it is that is proposed, that it's were initiated by the previous administration. I've heard the minister say that some of the ideas or some of the issues in the studies were being misrepresented by the present government. Certainly, there's a case that I don't think the studies went as far as to decide or even consider issues of in such detail like location at Wales and all that. That's a pure expansion and exaggeration. They were not that site specific. The studies covered nevertheless the ground that you would need to do as a preparatory study. So I would call them preparatory pre-feasibility studies, not feasibility studies, not project evaluation studies. The second aspect we need to look at is what are the main components of the project. We talk about the pipelines, but the pipelines are designed to transport the gas from the site offshore to onshore Guyana. But this is not the only option. You can also have the plants that they intend to establish are put offshore, and then the electricity is transferred onshore from it. So that issue will come up. But the main thing that we need to know at this point is the second area of concern then is what are the major components of the project. I think the government has summarized them in the budget. One is that it is a 250 megawatt power plant. One is a LPG plant, a liquid petroleum gas plant. The next component is an industrial park. The fourth component is the pipeline that you talk about, which runs for 210 kilometers. The fifth part is a recognition that the studies that have been done so far are pre-feasibility and they require detailed geophysical, geotechnical, engineering, environmental impact assessment studies to decide and to be definitive in giving guidance as to the strategic decisions we should make about the energy mix and to produce a master plan for that. In fact, that was the plan that was submitted and the closest one to that was the plan submitted in April this year by the Japanese government, which tried to produce a sort of energy master plan for Guyana. So the second feature, therefore, after the studies, is the components of the project, which I just talked about. The third issue that we have to consider with the project is its location. And why I mention this particularly is because most of the controversy that you find in the media centers on the fact that Wales was chosen. The government claimed that they chose Wales, or they were advised on Wales by the ExxonMobil, who have been doing studies of covering 20 alternative locations, and they found that Wales was the best site. It had the best facilities in terms of constructability, in terms of sheer appropriateness, in terms of population risk that you have to run. Wales was the most suitable site. And they gave three distinct rationales for why, of the 20 sites that they exhibited or considered, Wales was chosen. The fourth element of the project was its cost. And we have to look at that carefully because it represents, as I said, the second largest known commitment for spending out of the windfall revenues from oil. $1 billion is proposed to be spent, but in fact, 810 to 900. And once you see figures like that, you know that they come in at any severe between 1 billion and 1 billion 5. Because project estimates at this crude stage are always on the conservative side. They always fail to anticipate the rise in costs that might occur. They also sometimes underestimate the difficulties in finding things when you want them at the time you want them, and the competition therefore rises in the market. when we try to get things to meet the time schedule of operations. So I won't take those costs as final costs. I just would say that it's around $1 billion we're talking about, if not 1.5. So there's a substantial amount of money is involved, and we should recognize that. The fifth point about the gas show product we have to consider in our evaluations is that certain studies are still to be done. Those studies I mentioned earlier, the geophysical, the geotechnical, the engineering, the environmental impact assessment, the determination of the perfect energy mix of Guyana and all that. So that just being able to focus on the oil and gas is contingent on other studies to be done. The sixth element of some concern is the financing arrangement. I mentioned some of this earlier when I told you that ExxonMobil is going to finance the construction, or hinted at it. It's going to finance the construction of the pipelines and the plants and everything, and recover it from cost oil, which means they're not taking it out of their shareholders' pockets. It is out of funds that they're allowed under the PSA, that is the production shared agreement with the oil companies. The funds they're allowed to claim costs against when they try to establish the profit from which they would get their share of 50% from the company. So this is a sort of, that's why I'm saying, a sort of guarantee of the cost that Exxon will entail when they try to set up this plant and of all the studies and so on related to it, plus some markup, guaranteed in a sense because it's coming not from their shareholders, but it's coming from Guyana, giving them cost recovery benefits out of it. So we have for the first time, despite the fact that Kaisho News and places like that would tell you that they're taking money from Guyana, they're taking money from their shareholders. That's the correct way to put it. It's they who run the risk, not us. But this time, in this particular type of project, we will be running the risk. Now, because of that, I have made a recommendation in the papers today that we should set up a national oil company, not to produce or to refine oil, but to have a seat at the table in dealing with ExxonMobil and the partners, that we should commit the gas resources to the company, national oil company, and let them negotiate with Exxon the details of the financing so they both share the profits from the project if it's profitable, as I'm sure it's going to be, because of the markup arrangement the companies can engage in. And that is my way of trying to get around it. But the important point I want to make is that, or additional point, is that I have always been arguing, and I think I repeat the argument in this week's column that you mentioned or last week's, that a national oil company is an absolutely essential for Guyana to establish. We need to establish a national oil company because you would imagine from the way in which people write about oil in Guyana and how they treat us badly, you would imagine that most of the oil is being produced by the big, wicked oil companies. But do you know today the five largest companies in the world in terms of daily production of oil are all national oil companies? You know the 10 largest producers of oil on earth, 8 of them are national oil companies and not the 6 super majors they used to be. When people get into those arguments, they talk about what was happening in the 1980s. But a place like Saudi or Aramco, that's the biggest oil company in the world, producing over 10 million barrels a day. And they've been doing that now for decades. It's not as if these are new additions. So when you talk about putting pressure on companies to, you know, keep them greenhouse gas emissions and that type of thing, you should be addressing them. I remember we talking about about it, and I was telling somebody when Suriname established its oil company, Stasoli, I was invited to attend the opening ceremony. That was in 1980. That's 40 years ago. That's 4 decades ago. Trinidad Oil Company been going on for even longer. The 1970s. Petrobras, that is the Brazilian oil company, is over 40, over nearly 50 years old. The world is not a world in which big oil super majors dominate. It's a world where you have to negotiate with national companies that try to subdue the extent which ExxonMobil and these companies were exploiting the production of oil and set up rival companies to make sure they're stopped. If we don't recognize the basic environment in which it's taking place, how are we going to deal with it? How can you keep writing as if it is just ExxonMobil? They're about 7th or 8th on the list of the 10 top. It used to be the biggest super major, but it no longer is. In fact, as many people know it was even removed from the global index, the American Stock Index, as the company that is being used and replaced by Chevron. The calculation of those of the market valuation. So those are the things that we have to look at. So I would be that I would stress that we need to be very careful how we approach where we're going. The government claims that they will make savings about 150 million US dollars per year through the national gas company when it's established. Because under the present production, if it were undertaken by the electricity plants as it stands, the price in US dollars would be so much higher than what they could get it for if they produce it with gas, that the annual gain would be in that region. So the big set of money that we're talking about, it's not chicken feed. And I think finally that we will need to have or draw conclusions from all this. Because the environment in which we're now thinking of going to gas is an environment in which the same greenhouse gas lobby, the same lobby that is waging war against the production of fossil fuels, now considers gas as a new coal. And coal is the worst polluter on earth. So gas is now replacing that. It used to be coal, oil, and then natural gas. But now they recognize natural gas gives off enough methane in a short period of time as to be even more dangerous as a greenhouse gas emitter and more damage to the public. So there is, in a sense, a limited timeline, I would say, from now going forward to about 60 to 75 years before the pressures are so great that even the national oil companies would have to respond to the pressures of growing greenhouse gas emissions and taper their pollution of the atmosphere. But I believe that Ghana's need to get rid of poverty is so great that it cannot take the burden of the world on its back. It should contribute and to be as careful as it can, but it must do whatever it can also do to ensure that we don't have the continued perpetuation of poverty in our country and the altar of some, I would say, crazy environmentalist view that the oil is better if it's left under the ground. We didn't give ourselves the oil. It's a matter of good fortune that is there. We didn't place it there. Religious people say the maker of the universe did. I'm not claiming that, but the point that I want to make is that these are wealth and resources that we have to use to make benefits for our people. If we come at a point in time when we can afford not to use them or to use them in different ways, we do so. But we have to also, I think, recognize that the world is changing and to do so in a very creative way. So I think those will be my sort of introductory ideas to the topic, and I hope we can lay the basis both for your question and answer and for the broader debate.
If I can, Professor Thomas, can I ask you to expand a little bit on the benefits of the National Oil Company? That's one of the questions that I'm seeing coming from the audience.
Well, the national oil company I'm talking about is not one that is going to go in the production of oil refining, but it seeks to establish a legal relationship as a company and therefore decision sharing relationship with Exxon and the partners. Remember, under the PSA, the Guyana government owns the oil wells, and ExxonMobil and partners are contractors. What we want to do is to invest into that ownership of the assets, a relationship with a company that allows us to share any decisions about the future of the company. We will, of course, have to take the risk that their shareholders will have to give up, or if they expand it to include us, the risk that we take on. We'll have to carry those risks. But the only way we can have a seat at the table of decision making is if we have not this contractor agent relationship, contractor owner relationship, is if we have a joint company relationship where decisions have to pass through both parties. And we invest in the company resources that we own, and we can start with the gas. Because otherwise they'll have to bury upon it. And we are prohibiting that. We try to prohibit that.
Mm-hmm.
So we should vest that in the ownership of the oil company and use that to set up a new company that includes our participation with the development wherever we're doing with the onshore complex. I feel that's the better way to go because there's no other way. We have other strategic decisions to make going down the line. Do we want to be a member of OPEC? We don't know. At this point in time, we don't have to rush decision. But the national oil companies, all the major ones are. So we have to decide whether we can be an outsider, playing a strategic swing role, or whether we're going to be an insider and what we're going to fight for. But all these options can only exist when we're a participant. And we only can have a seat at the table of OPEC or wherever it is, or have them come to deal for us if we have a national oil company that is sharing the decision making, not just left all in the hands of Exxon. So this foolish move to treat as if we can just go forward and try to negotiate and leave the relationship as it is does not recognize the realities because what ExxonMobil is going to say, and they say it with absolute clarity, they don't have no indebtedness to Guyana. They have an indebtedness to their shareholders. And their shareholders will work with Guyana to make money, and that is their mission.
Mm-hmm.
But we have to be sure that we are in the decision-making process, so don't make money only at our expense, and it does not satisfy our national strategic interests. We are not going to be a marginal player like Trinidad, and yet they have a national company.
Mm-hmm.
finance with 30 and 50,000 barrels a day. It makes me laugh. And setting on the stage, we're
Yeah.
talking about million plus, maybe 1.5 million barrels of oil per day by the mid 2020s, or certainly in the early 2030s. That's what we're aiming for. That's what the companies are aiming for. The initial target was 750,000 barrels of oil in the next 3 or 4 years per day. Just read what they write when they found the 20th discovery. Everything is now being upgraded. They're saying Liza 1 is now not going to produce 120,000. It can produce 140 to 150,000 because they learned now that they can get more optimization out of all the stuff, the pipelines and the connectors that they built. Because they're learning on the job, they're learning by doing. And that is what you have to expect in any creative and highly developed industrial environment. So we expect the companies to grow like that. We want to participate in that growth and that development. None of the technology is being passed on to us. We don't even know. We still have to read about it.
Yeah.
So I think the football as a company, our company gives us a good excuse. The gas plant company gives a good excuse for both negotiating a contract and for establishing a foothold that way.
And in case you're just joining us, we are talking about the gas to shore pipeline. Professor Clive Thomas, our next presenter, is former Minister of Infrastructure, was not joining us yet. He's on his way from Berbice, where there was an outreach today. He will join us shortly, but we press on with questions for Dr. Thomas, based on his presentation. Dr. Thomas, is Wales, in your estimation, the best location? We know that the study said that it is. What do you think from your own independent perspective?
To arrive at a conclusion, I have to see the study that was done. I'm being fair and honest. I have not seen it. But as I've written in the papers, I'm very conscious of the fact that the major contributors to the financing of the research work in Ghana, the World Bank and the IDB, are at pains to point out that they have never participated in the selection of whales. So that raises a level of caution on my part that this may not be a decision that is made on purely economic grounds. Some people believe that government has the right to make a political decision, a political choice about the project. But the question is to what extent, how much economic disbenefit or loss is being incurred by choosing the site. And I have not been privy to the studies. I was hoping the minister would have given us some idea.
One other question here has to do with, do you think that the gas to shore pipeline would bring the necessary economic benefits to Guyana? Or is there some other project that would be more profitable for the people of Guyana?
I think it can bring benefits if it is organized as a national company, if it seeks to develop the dynamic spillovers that I talked about. And I have a feeling that the previous government, I really have no personal evidence of this, was undertaking those studies maybe with the intention of making such a proposal, because it must have occurred to everybody that one of the ways in which we could tackle Guyana's energy problem was through the formation of a LPG plant and a gas to shore generation of energy. But I must say that the studies that were done, particularly Japanese study, the most recent one, looked at two options apart from the site, but involving the site. One was to locate it offshore the plant and pump the electricity into the onshore areas where the demand is, or where to locate it at the demand end that is onshore and send the oil by the pipeline. There are advantages and disadvantages for both. But when they looked at the economics of it, they claimed that's a Japanese study, that there's no particular merit to which choice was made. But I had broad economic arguments in my column last week and this week. I argue that in terms of avoiding the development of enclaves in Guyana, that we need to locate it on shore to ensure that the oil industry doesn't remain an enclave, isolated from the rest of Guyana, as Mackenzie and all those places used to be in the old days. It has to be integrated so the spillovers into the national economy will be evident to everybody and not working just through the money that is you give to the government in revenue and they're spending it. I think there's great merit in trying to prevent that type of enclave oil industry from developing.
Mhm. And,
So,
and what are some? Go ahead.
so
I was just about to
personally,
ask what are some of those spillovers? So those possible spillovers.
well, could you imagine if you have a plant constructed for $1 billion located in some area, let's say the area X, all the surrounding industries, the garages, the shops, the housing, all these other things will benefit from the activities taking place there. The people
Mhm.
going to work, the people going out to buy lunch, the industrial work, the need for parts, the need for spares, and the convenience of being near to the site. All those things will operate. But if you're offshore, it is a different type of environment. Unless
Mhm.
you have a specialty with shipping, but I think that limits our friend Mr. Cambridge and argued for that. The ships, developing a lot of ships to bring the oil in rather than pipeline.
There's a question here. The fact that the pipeline has to pass the Demerara bar, how significant would shipping impact on the construction and continued presence?
All those things have to be studied now. That's what I'm saying. The studies that were done are pre-feasibility studies. You know, if you're going to do a feasibility or project evaluation study or a study to construct an actual project, you have to determine and measure all those things. You can't just estimate them. And that
Mhm.
work has not been done. But the government has said it would do it, but I don't know how far that can be relied on.
Um, do you think that the present government is as bullish about the pipeline as the previous government?
No, I really don't know if the previous government was bullish. I didn't know what decisions they were going to make about the energy mix. I thought the research was showing the need for a master plan, was showing the need for a broad energy mix involving environment and everything else, solar, renewables, and so on. I thought the authorities were committed to that. I think that's the way we'll have to go eventually. But in terms of a concrete commitment to the pipeline, I never saw this matter being raised. Pipelines
Mhm.
carry risks that we have to be aware of. Oil pipelines, for example, cause at least a death or serious explosion or serious incident 319 times on average per year.
Wow.
That's the recent average. So it's almost one a day. But the oil pipelines are not as risky as not the oil, the gas pipelines. and others where they're more expensive
Mhm.
because to be able to transport gas, which is flammable, which is toxic, and which can explode with misuse. You have to build sturdier conveyances and use a lot more protection. They're also open to the vulnerabilities of what we're seeing now in the United States. That's cyber warfare, terrorism. People can
Mhm.
hack your pipeline, threaten to shut down your country. Because we know that GPL was subject to ransomware. This can be found out on the internet. So if that has been done already, and I'm sure it's been done for other companies in the Caribbean, the pipeline will definitely attract attacks. You just halt the pipeline for a day or two, and most people prefer to pay the ransom and try to deal with the cost of the inconvenience.
Mhm. There's another question here with the Gas to Shore project. Will there be new infrastructure and architecture style building to match the century we're living in?
Yeah, that is all that's got to be done. It's an entirely new industrial park that they want to develop. So it's not just the physical location they plan, but all the things that come with an industrial park, the other accommodating complementary services. So the buildings and the stock of equipment that's been expected to be put there will be quite modern, and I would hope they'll be put in some modern style of modular build up so as to be able to complete it by 2024. But I must say the study that was done in 2021 was using the starting point of 2024, the commencement point. But the
Mhm.
government talking as if that was the end point. So
Mhm.
I know how much is hype and how much is concrete practice.
Mhm. Professor Thomas, there's a question here. Would you say the removal of the mangroves without a proper feasibility study is premature?
Very premature, very ignorant too.
Very premature and ignorant.
Yeah.
Um, can a private company or individuals invest in the oil refinery in Guyana? Don't you think this will create more jobs for the Guyanese people?
Well, there's a period when people thought they would establish what is called mini refineries. That is small mobile refineries that are bought, all constructed and ready to operate. And if you remember, there's a lot of discussion of it where people were offering shares at once, $1 share. You remember a
Yes, I
few years
remember
ago,
that, right?
everybody wants to set up a mini refinery. But my recommendation is to any government is that we shouldn't get into that. Let the private sector do that. Let them put the money where the mouth is. Let them run the risk. And we should not be trying to complicate life for the poor by diverting or wasting resources and trying to support some private venture that might fail. Because these are usually going should be and should be always private ventures which will make a profit.
Mhm. Thank you, Professor Thomas. I see in the audience my friend Neil Rogers. And Neil and I go back a long way, all the way back in Washington, D.C. When I went to Washington, D.C. in 1987, it was Neil who gave me my first job working with his company doing construction. Neil Rogers, who is the son of Daphne Rogers,
Yeah.
the late Daphne Rogers.
Yeah, she
Neil
just
is
died.
Yes, he's back in Guyana, and he's I think
Please
into the
pass on my
construction business.
communication. Please pass on
Yes,
my condolences. Yeah.
yes. Professor Thomas passes his condolences, Neil, and all of the audience. Their condolences on the passing of your mom, Daphne Rogers, who was indeed a tower in education and certainly in other attendant areas such as theater and so on. For a long time, she worked there at the National Cultural Center. Our condolences to you. There's a question here, Professor. What about setting up a modular oil refinery process, about 30 to 40,000 barrels per day, to satisfy Guyana current needs? This would also give Guyanese a chance to be educated about the processing of crude oil and benefit from the byproducts.
Yes, that's what I'm saying. That should be a private sector project. I would certainly support that. But I don't think we want the government to construct it. You know what that's going to mean?
Yes,
So many hands
yes.
in those pockets. We can't even run the retail oil company Guy Oil without rackets. How you think I would say let the private sector run that, give them the opportunity, give them the license, guarantee them the oil, the crude oil.
Yes.
By having a national oil company, all those things become possible.
Yes.
You see, we buy on behalf of the national oil company X amount of barrels of oil, and then we're responsible for its distribution and sale. As part of
Yes.
internal project, we can negotiate that. The companies don't mind because they would feel the goodwill and they don't have to take the responsibility if it goes wrong. So a lot of creative things can be done once you have a national oil company. And the National Resource Governance Institute has recommended that every developing country establish an NOC. So as to have a seat at the table, as they put it, of decision making. Don't leave it all to the oil companies.
And the questions keep coming. Orin Barker, no, Rhonda Lane asks what she considers a common sense question. Should any one of those explosions you talked about occur, how far afield people will be affected?
Well, it depends on how sizable the leak. But there are always some involved in sometimes fatalities in significant numbers. They were also subject to sabotage. And I didn't want to have to say it on the radio, on the television, the public airwaves. We have border problems too. So we run a risk of hostile interventions. If the company, if the oil production, the energy production was taking place overseas, now they can't be done onshore. But sabotage and that type of thing is easier. You also have to consider pipelines too have traditionally been a target of activities against states, either sponsored by other states or by criminal gangs. That would be the favorite way of making money. You threaten a leakage and they have to rush and pay you, or you just blow up a site. You know, these things happen. So you enter into a new world of costs and expenses and risks than the one that we are accustomed to. I can't hear you. I can't hear you.
Orin asks, how can he join the WPA? Orin, please inbox me. Any others who are interested in joining the WPA, please inbox me. And here Doris Rogers, Neil, not Daphne. Do you think it is a good thing for the government to give cleaning projects to their supporters who just start up businesses, and those cleaning companies who were there a long time in the struggle can get projects. This is from Sherry. So she probably is referring here to a matter that is not directly to our directly related to our topic.
But it's an important item, though.
Yes,
Because
go
I
ahead,
think
Professor Thomas.
it is an important item. I think I sent you a video, which I think is circulating in the Guyanese communities, showing the distribution of hampers and foodstuffs to various communities. And a number of villages have been complaining. For example, some showing you the bag of rice is left in the African villages, and other villages have more complete packages with other things. And
Yes.
some cane cutters, I think, in the video I sent you, were complaining, or Gaisugo workers, I know the cane cutters, were complaining that not even sugar they put with it when they leave it in front of the black people houses. But when they go to the other houses, they put a complete hamper and they're pointing it out on the road. There's a video circulating up there.
Yes, you did send it to me. There is a question here. Professor Thomas, would you say that we should put a hold on the gas to shore pipeline while we deal with some of the emergencies we have now, such as COVID-19 and the flood?
Yes, and I would say that we should do that because we need to see the studies. I don't want to hear in the next 6 months that the studies haven't been done, but we complete construction of this and that. And that is what I fear is happening. People are going ahead if the study is approved. And I know from experience that when that is done, it's too late to correct the errors that you might discover when you do proper studies. And a bad project is a terrible waste of money. It's not just the current money, but the money going forward.
Mm-hmm.
The inability to satisfy the needs and wants that you are projecting to satisfy. So that going forward, it's also continuous loss and waste.
Mm-hmm. There's another question here that Guyanese do not have the necessary expertise yet, and most of the companies tend to employ Jamaicans and Trinidadians who have the expertise. How will this affect us in Guyana, or how would these projects benefit Guyana if we don't have the necessary skills?
Well, we have to set up and start getting people trained, because when I travel abroad, I find that Guyanese are very competitive in terms of the skills and trades and technical areas in which they work in compared to other immigrants. So I don't think that we don't have a mechanism for searching them out and a mechanism for encouraging the return to Guyana. But I think that we are competitive with like any other Caribbean country in terms of being able to generate that type of skill. And we need to have a program in place. We can't forever say we need to do this and we need to do that. We don't have this. We don't have that. If there's a lack of skills, a lack of capacities, the government has to make efforts to get that going in Guyana. We can't just sit back. That's part of any project. And that's why I'm saying we need a careful studies
Mm-hmm.
of these things, because you see things that you need to do, that you fill the gaps and the needs as you go along.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So, is the current government showing any interest in this new study we're talking about?
Well, not with me. I have no relation with them. I'm just discussing the ideas here
Mm-hmm.
and in the media where I have been carrying a column for years.
Mm-hmm.
It's open to anybody who wants to read it, but I've had no personal contacts.
Mhm. In case you're just joining us, we're discussing the gas to shore pipeline. Professor Clive Thomas is on. We are supposed to be joined by Minister Patterson. He's having some technical difficulties. He's been trying to get on. We're trying to get that fixed while we are waiting, but we're really having a good question and answer session here, getting Professor Thomas to deal with a lot of questions. Professor Thomas, here's a question. Since the money is being held in the United States Bank, what should be done to get the money into the Bank of Guyana?
I think they deliberately want to keep it there. I don't think the matter of if they can get it there if they want to. I think the whole idea is to deposit it in US dollars, deposit it in a liquid way so if they ever need it, they can draw on it. But that money is supposed to be part of the Natural Resources Fund. And that fund is supposed to deal with emergencies. And the point I'm trying to make is that I cannot imagine a greater emergency than the pandemic, which is once in 100 years, or a flood, which many people consider to be the greatest flood we've ever had. We're suffering from both. We can't have money of that amount. 320, about 350 million US dollars is already there. We expect by the end of the year something like about 700 to be added to that total because the price of oil is going up. We can't have $1 billion sitting down waiting for something to happen. And my fear is that some harebrained project, maybe this, might take the place of a more poor use of the resources. And this might fully fill in the pockets of those who supplying the stuff from overseas, the friends of politicians, the contacts, feasibility studies, and all these things become jobs for the boys. And so we waste the money that way. That is my concern.
Desiree says here that without a proper study, you could end up doing a wrong thing right. Kenneth is asking here, Professor, if there is a rupture in the pipeline, who would be responsible for the toxic cleanup exercise?
Well, if we say it's our pipeline, we will be responsible. That's different.
Rhonda is saying here that yes, there may be a problem with the money being in a US bank, but our fear is that if the money comes out of there, it will go into the hands of the regime who are known as thieves.
Yeah, but I know that's the concern of most people. But I still believe there's a national waste for us to have need for money, need to meet needs in the country, real needs. The people in all these regions are flooded out, the people who are dying from COVID and the stress, the lack of work, the opportunities, are taking a toll on Guyanese, and I feel that, we have to have a more systematic response. I mean, the responsibility of government is to look after its people. And if we can't show that, then what are we doing? And that is why I feel it is hard to justify. We're not saying take all the money out, but I can't imagine a greater need for emergency. Historians a century from now will say, how could they have left all that money there and they needed it? How could they, if we look back a century and we find that this is what has been happening? We had resources and people were just sitting on it, arguing about it. But the fear is, I think, a part among that was raised last week when we had the discussion.
Yes.
Minister of Finance that the government might want to get their hands on the money to appropriate it, and that is why they're not too keen to go through the stringent rules of the natural resource fund.
Yeah. Professor Thomas, we have quite an audience here tonight. They're very much into the subject. And what jumps out at me is that it seems to be an audience that is majority women. Economics, as you know, like some of these subjects have always been the purview of mostly men. So it is good to see our women in the audience, and a lot of the questions are coming from them. Simone is asking, will it be economically sound to have an agreement with Trinidad to refine some of our oil and be able to sell the refined products locally and to carry country?
Well, I think it's been always, I've argued this in a book that I wrote years ago called The Dynamics of West Indian Economic Integration.
Yes.
We've always argued that we should rationalize the production of the basic goods that enter the production of all other goods, and oil is one. We should definitely rationalize that across the whole Caribbean because the islands are so small that you have to create a platform for engaging production of certain basic commodities. And that platform gives you the scale of operation where you can reap economies of scale. Most of these industries have a long, like an L shape. And unless you come around that curve, you don't meet significant economies of scale. And to be able to do that on these basic commodities, you have to be pooling production and operating from that level. So I think there's a case for that, definitely.
Mm-hmm.
And including Suriname, because Suriname, our basin is tied in with Suriname. It's the Guyana-Suriname basin. And that basin may have 35 billion barrels of oil in it.
Yes. There's a question here, Professor, from Sherry. She says, she asked, "Oh, is it?" She may be a teacher. So she's asking about. Let me make sure I don't lose that question. Here it is. All our teachers living on a salary of 2019 in 2021? And why is there not an increase of the salaries of teachers and other public servants with the oil money?
Well, they're scrunting, they're not living. They're scrunting. A lot of them have to make their living in ways I wouldn't like to say on the public television. A lot of them are hustling and begging and borrowing. It's difficult, and with schools closed, some of them are doing some private lessons and things like that, but exposing themselves to COVID and risks, which are unusual. And that is why I feel that we can't become an oil producing company. You know, there's a report out today, not today, sorry, on Friday, from the World Bank that shows that our economy performed better than all the economies in the Latin American region.
Mm-hmm.
It formed the rate of growth that the government used in the budget. And it also projects rates of growth in the region of 16 and 20% going forward next year and the year after. No, that's a remarkable development, and we can't continue to act as if we are a little poor country. Yet all you hear is begging and no attempt to rationalize or organize. There's no talk about wage. There's complete deunionization of the entire workforce. The government gives increases to the public services, doesn't negotiate it. I know that for a fact because I have some into exchanges with the unions. They come to me sometimes for advice. And it's clear the government does not want to negotiate. They prefer to fix an arbitrary wage and then tell them to take it or leave it. And in most cases, the unions cannot leave it. Suffering.
May she?
You know, and for working class governments, that's terrible.
Professor, there's a question here. Do you think that the skilled persons would willingly return to Guyana when we see how the professionals such as Vincent Adams and others are treated? Do you think we should return?
Well, I have stayed, so so I may be a sucker for punishment. It is a punishing situation, and you sometimes question if it's worth it. But I'm politically committed, so I would like to pretend that it's not difficult. I was hoping that in the last administration, we might have been able to make a breakthrough in that and create a sense of optimism, a sense of Guyanese coming back to build and develop a new society. To build, as your president would say, to build back better.
Gary wants to know what happens to the gas to shore facilities when the oil runs out and there is no more gas in those oil wells. What happens to the immediate inhabitants, etc., job-wise, when some would have made major investments?
Well, that's a risk that they'll have to take. I'm sure that we can, by then, we'll be thinking of renewables. That's why they should approach it as an energy mix, not only involving gas, but renewables. Because at this point in time, the best studies show that oil is going to be the dominant, oil and gas, the dominant fuels to 2050. And then there's going to be a relatively slow decline. They can still be consumed at annual rates rising around 3 to 5%, but they won't go above 5. So there will gradually be a transition lasting maybe another 100 years when you no longer have reliance on oil. But in this period, one expects that renewable sources of energy, solar, wind, hydropower, these things will biomass, these things will begin to take the lead and create the opportunities. So we can't go look at it moving from one fuel to another fuel. We have to go for the energy mix now. So we're building a transition plan.
David wants to know, and not me, this is another David who I know thinks about this subject because I have read his comments ever so often on Facebook. He is always engaged in these issues. He wants to know, why is the cost of the gas to shore pipeline being absorbed in the cost of oil versus being treated as a separate project? You can tell this is a technical man.
Yeah. I think the reason is to be able to do that project up front, the government got to find the money. And to my mind, the only way they can find the money, because they don't have any lenders based on the I won't risk it. I mean, they might consider it. But I think it'd be difficult to find a lender who would lend them $1 billion. And they should not borrow, I think, $1 billion to go ahead and do that. So what they're doing is using ExxonMobil's shareholders to finance the project. And ExxonMobil is tempted, or should be tempted, because it's a guarantee of repayment. This is coming through a legal provision for cost oil. And since the gas is going to be provided at cost plus a markup, so they should go laughing all the way to the bank. This is how I wrote it in the papers today. This is use of money. This is a real backfist, so you call it. This is a real backfist. Because you get everything you want. You get maybe 18, 20% return on your money. Go all the way to the bank. clear guarantee, because that's the only way the government can get it done. They can't find the money any other way.
Mhm. Gary is asking here again, what in your opinion is a rough estimate? What will be the final cost for the gas to shore project? Professor Thomas Gary at the beginning had said he estimates it to be around 1.5 billion. I mean, they're saying close to 1 billion now. But he said when you make allowances for all of those things, he thinks it could end up 1.5 billion. Professor Thomas, am I
Yeah,
correct?
that's my figure. Yeah.
Right, that's the figure. Albert Morgan is in the house from number 51, Village Union on the quarantine. Anne is saying that I'm of the firm opinion that Guyana should never build oil refineries. They're too expensive compared with the returns. Professor, I know you had some things to say on the oil refinery business when it was first raised.
But the what?
Oil refinery. Anne is
Yeah, I don't
saying,
think we should know. I don't think the government should be building oil refineries. I don't think we
yes,
should stop a private individual if they want to put their money at risk. But I don't think. But we shouldn't be guaranteeing no cheap oil to them either, because we don't know
mm-hmm,
what's going to happen down the way. You see, as the transition out of oil begins to take place, the price of oil is expected to rise. Many people believe before the transition can really be affected, the price of oil will reach about $200. So we're talking about even the level at which I do the calculations of $60 and $70 per barrel. We're talking of phenomenal increases in oil revenues in many, many serious people's estimations.
yes. Olive is up with us from London. The time there in London must be um,
5 hours, 5 hours on from Guyana.
from Guyana, so it has to be past midnight. And we're keeping Olive up to talk economics. This is like I said, Professor. I'm looking here, and it seems that a good 60 to 70% of this audience is women. What's happening in your field of economics?
Well, I, I hope it's me. No,
Yeah,
but that's very hard thing to hear, though.
yeah.
I think most
know. I
housewives,
mean, usually on these very technical subjects, the men tend to predominate, but there are a lot of women here tonight, um, and asking questions and participating. Some of you are asking how to join the WPA. Please inbox me or inbox Kinaki Amsterdam on on Wednesday morning. Camps TV is going to have what we're calling a town hall meeting with Aubrey Norton. As you know, he's vying for the leadership of the PNC, and there'll be a town hall meeting with him in which you're going to be able to get in to the chat room to ask questions. We may have started it here because we did not intend this program to go the way it has gone. Mr. Patterson has not gotten for technical, he's having technical problems, but this has turned out to be excellent. And I think what we are going to do is that once per month, we're going to bring Professor Thomas on to answer questions on economics, because we're discovering that people have so many questions on these issues. And so we'll do once per month in an economics 101. Asking questions, and you can see Professor Thomas as a teacher and educator that he has enjoyed this because it takes him back in the classroom. He gets to respond to a lot of your questions. This is good knowledge for Guyanese people to keep us updated. This is Tessa, who is saying this. I have learned so much tonight. Why don't you get Professor Thomas to come back very often on a Sunday evening in a relaxed manner like this, and we get to chat. Um, um, Karen is saying if we are not careful, all the oil is going to go to India and the money staying in the Indian bank.
Yeah, that's a matter of concern too.
Yes. Yes. So, Raul, good night. Donald, good night. Stafford, good night. Um, uh, Somebody here wants to know, do I join the WPA? That's good to hear that people are expressing interest in the WPA. We are engaged in some discussions in the party as to the way forward. All parties, we think, at various moments should reflect on their own relevance to the situation. And we are a party that came out of the radical movement the 60s and the 70s. And so, as we enter the second decade, this third decade of the 21st century, we're having these discussions about how we can adapt our party to the changing circumstances. And one of the things that we're talking about or anticipating is new blood, new professionals, new working people coming into the party. We intend to have these forums, these citizen forums, where we get to interact as we're doing here now with the wider audience who can inform us as to what we should do. Perhaps in another week or two, we can have a forum where we hear from you what you think the WPA should be doing, how you think we should organize our party to meet the new demands. Our view is that there is always a need for parties like ours. We are not the big parties with the big mass following and so on. But we do have a niche, we do have a role to play, we think, in terms of educating the populace, as we're doing here, in terms of developing ideas for development, in terms of engaging the working people in discussion about their own future. One of the things about Walter Rodney, he didn't believe that we needed to lead the struggle. He felt that working people had the capacity to develop their own ideas and their own motions, and that we were there to help the struggle. And I think it's one of the things. So we, in another week or so, the WPA will come in a town hall setting like this, a forum like this, and talk with you about what you think we should be doing. Because at the end of the day, a political party is an investment of the people and for the people, for us to use as political and economic nourishment. We want to thank you tonight. And like I said, those of you who have an interest, please inbox me, inbox Brother Kedaki, Amsterdam, and we will take it from there. I want to thank you all so much for staying with us. Let me see how the currency of the country has changed. Good night, Professor Thomas. Professor, do you really think Guyanese will inherit anything from this oil when Exxon is burdening the country with all kinds of expenses?
You see, one of the difficulties we face is that I don't want to appear to be a defendant for Exxon. They can handle themselves. But the studies that have been done on the cost of oil production, on the projects that Exxon is engaged in Guyana, and done by the IDB and the World Bank, show that the average cost of production for Guyana's oil is 18 US dollars per barrel. Many people were shocked to hear that from the way it is written up in the press. This is what the IDB estimated. And not just the IDB, their Department of Petroleum Engineering. Their net revenue they use to calculate in their models of production because this study was done in August of 2020, used a price of $48 per barrel of oil. And we know that $40 per barrel of oil has already been surpassed because of the recovery due to the vaccines. Already people talking about $70 and more. So the difference between 18 and 48, 29.83 or whatever it is, represents the gross profit that comes from every barrel of oil we produce. The barrels of oil are broken down in terms of how much is capital cost, how much is the cost of decommissioning the fields, how much is the cost of operations, how much is the cost of drilling, how much is any conceivable cost you can think of. There are about 5 major categories. I think I list them all there. So that there's a significant gap between the price of oil and the cost of oil production. And we split that gap 50-50. Now they can claim back for the decommissioning, for the spend on capital and all that. But because it is so much less than the price of oil, these claims only reach the upper limit for part of the life cycle of the project. Let's say they have a payback period of 4 or 5 years, which in fact is a typical case. Within 5 years, the 75% limit is exhausted. And then the costs go to what it is actually 18 over 48, which is less than half. So the margin of profit is about $28 per barrel. So when it is said that we have to pay back so much and so much, it's determined by the cost that they can claim. And these projects have a life cycle. Because the lease of one field, for example, which we're working on now, but we entered 2 and 3, the PIR and all those other things already. These go for 15, 20 years. So for the vast majority of the years, we will not be at the 75% limit. But whenever people do calculations in the papers, they assume the 75% limit is arrived at. Based on the false question that was raised there, we owe them so much. Are we getting crumbs?
Mhm.
The gap is so wide. And that is part of our good fortune that we should be celebrating rather than, presenting fake news to make it look as if we are not getting as much as we should be. We can get more and we should get more. Don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to defend the oil companies, but I'm saying the good fortune that Guyana has. It's Guyana's good fortune, and we don't have anything to gain by denying it. All we have to gain is to deny the opportunity to get the poor people out of poverty. That's the only thing that can be gained by pretending otherwise. So I begin to question most of the people who consistently try to present a situation as if we're hopeless or helpless. There's a lot of room to maneuver. And that is why I debated the study, but they are so feckless. They said in the study they deliberately don't want to get involved in the debates in Ghana. When all of this shows the lack of courage, they should be coming in to throw light on the debates. The figures I'm using are figures from IDB. I think it's criminal what they did. Because if they had used their influence and authority to say, you're talking nonsense, it would have put a stop to a lot of the drivel. So you have a rearguard action to fight to get people to realize this. The thing is, that's why I use the example when I deal with this topic of the United States, where people, I think I mentioned to you, 70% of the Republicans believe that Trump is still the president, the actual president of the United States. They don't believe he's out of office.
Hmm.
A level of so I know the people who believe that. I mean, it's so difficult to ever be able to convince them. They can't be convinced. That's the truth, and people are feeding them this, and they continue to believe it. And so that's part of the new reality. Same thing with us. We fed so many concoctions of what is happening in the oil industry that people have driven out the truth.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
in that atmosphere, it's difficult to know how to get people's attention.
yeah,
So
yeah.
what I'm hoping is a few intelligent people at least will keep their eyes on the goal of
Yes,
what we're trying to do.
and we do have quite a few here tonight. Sharon, good night. Shalimar, Troy, Gloria, who just asked that question. Paul Mohabir, welcome. Um, Albert Morgan, Dr. Hines, can the professor tell us how the citizens of Guyana can expect to reap the benefits of the oil money? We talk about fast transfer proposal that we've put on the table as one way, and we are going to
I was
discuss that on a program by itself in the coming weeks. So stay tuned. Albert Aubrey, shared governance and 2/3 majority in parliament for decisions on oil is a good way to go. Yes, that's something WPA for decades. We were probably the pioneers of this idea of power sharing, the government of national unity and reconstruction, which Professor Walter Rodney had a big hand in crafting. Mr. Hines, can you bring back Professor Thomas and Mr. Vincent Adams on your program and give us a rundown on the Exxon Mobil and everything, the background and so on? Yes, Dr. Vince Adams was invited tonight, but he's out of town. He said he'll be available after next week. We are going to get him back. We did invite him tonight, unfortunately. He couldn't make it. Dr. Hines and Dr. Thomas, University of Guyana programs are without merit when presented for accreditation. Little or no exemptions are offered in Canada and England. Do you think this should be addressed? Thomas.
clearly it should be addressed. And it doesn't speak well of the university when that happens.
Yes.
And I
Simone?
remember cases, sometimes personal ones, not necessarily you, but people have had to write to the universities to validate their capabilities.
Yes. Yes. I remember when I transferred from UG to a US university, I got 12 credits for a course. And this was way back in the 1980s.
Yeah.
I got 12 credits for a course, and 12 credit is 4 3-credit courses in America,
Yeah.
and or 3 4-credit courses. And I was able to get 12 credit for each of my course. What it said about the way in which the university was seen back then was quite encouraging. Where is Michael? Michael Danes. Hines, you are a disgrace and a dishonest racist and a hooligan. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Michael. I tell you, every black man is a racist for you all. Anyhow, here we are. We've gone past program time. Professor Thomas, I want to thank you so much for this here tonight and for keeping this program going for almost 2 hours. Yeah. And you answered so many questions from the audience. The audience was engaged. I know you all have been telling me, Dr. Hines, you must have a call-in, but you found something better than a call-in. Professor Thomas has been able to answer, 40 questions tonight, and we have found a model. Thank you all so much. What a way to end this Walter Rodney Day.
To celebrate it, yeah.
To celebrate it and to go back into what Walter Rodney himself would have been so proud of, public discourse in the public space, where ordinary people are not only learning for us, but you are teaching us. All of the comments that you have made here about oil show that you are on top of it. Thank you all so much. And Professor Thomas, thank you very much. And if I may step out a little, I hope WPA continues to do this kind of work as we go forward. We go forward. Thank you all so much.
Okay, good. Right.
Thank you. And here we are at the end of this Walter Rodney Day. This is my 6th program for the day. I started very early this morning talking about Walter Rodney, and we end here talking about Guyana, talking about you, talking about a brother who is caught up, his name and his legacy is caught up in the partisan tug of war in Guyana. But you're helping us on this day to untangle him. Walter Rodney is one of our gifts to the world, our gifts to ourselves, our gifts to our Caribbean. And we are glad that in his name, we could be discussing this tonight. Good night, Denise Booker, officer, my partner from Buxton. She don't drink beer, she drinks shandy. But there we are, at the end of this day, in the name of Walter Rodney, talking about our oil and gas, talking about our patrimony. We hope that we have taken one step closer to the national unity that we seek. I said earlier today, no one is going to stop me from talking to anyone by telling me that I betray Rodney. If I sit down and I talk to Aubrey Norton or Joe Harmon or Amanza Desir, how am I betraying Rodney? I'm talking to my fellow Guyanese. Yes, our parties were once squaring off, but in order to move Guyana forward, we've got to heal. We've got to heal. We've got to reconcile. And you don't make peace with friends, you make peace with enemies. And in any case, we are countrymen and women. We should not be enemies. We can disagree. We can disagree. We have made mistakes in the past, and we can indict each other for those mistakes. But those indictments should not prevent us from sitting down. And I'm saying on this June 14th, no one is going to frighten me with that nonsense that you betray Rodney. I betray Rodney because I am in a government with Valda Lawrence or Aubrey Norton or Joe Harmon or David Patterson. How can I? I'm searching. We are searching. We are searching for that sweet spot that all of us Guyanese yearn for. The PPP talks to the PNC when it wants. Why can I not talk to the PNC? Why can I not sit with my brother or my sister who looks like me but belongs to another party? I'm not giving up my right to associate with who I want to associate. I spend every living day of my life doing Walter Rodney's work. I don't have to wait for somebody to tell me to do that. And part of doing Walter Rodney's work is bringing our country together, regardless of partisan differences. We in the WP are not going nowhere. We're not giving in to anybody. We're not letting anybody tell us who our friends are. We know who assassinated Walter Rodney. We've said it from the mountaintop for 4 decades. But we are not going to allow Walter Rodney's assassination to become a wedge to tear us apart in Guyana. If anything, we are going to use the lessons of his assassination to bring us together, to bring us together, to bring us together. We need unity inside of our ethnic groups. We need unity between our ethnic groups. We need unity between old and young Guyanese. In the face of those who will wish to take our oil patrimony, our oil money, our oil revenues away, We have to join our hands and our hearts. And now with the technology, we can do so across the waters, whether we are in North America or in the Caribbean or London or Europe. We can join our hearts and hands together and pledge for our country. Some of us have been in the trenches too long to give up now. We may be weary, but we're not done. We're not done because those of us who believe in a God, God is not done with us. Those of us who believe in the ancestors have sent us here to do their work, to continue their work. And so if you all bear with us, join with us. Join with us as we continue this journey. This critical period in our history, as we celebrate 41 years after the murder of our brother. Brother Bob Marley said, "How long shall they kill our prophets while we stand aside and look?" Some say it's just a part of it. We've got to fulfill that book. Well, no. Brother Bob, you're right. Our prophets will not die in vain. Walter Rodney, Maurice Bishop. Our brothers, Malcolm X and Martin Luther King. Patrice Lumumba in Africa. Steve Biko in South Africa. Those revolutionaries who gave their life so that we are here today. We don't have to agree with their politics. We don't have to agree with every word that comes from their mouth, but their mission was always to free us from the shackles of past enslavement and colonization. We're not letting nobody determine who we talk to. That is my message. My message on this Walter Rodney anniversary. I am taking back my dignity. I'm taking back my right to talk to who I want to talk to sit with who I want to sit with. We are all Guyanese. We're all Guyanese. You don't have to agree with me. You don't have to agree with my party. But see with me and work with me so that together we can take our country to the plateau. We can take our country to that place, that sweet land. We can take our country to the mountaintop. Remember Dr. Martin Luther King said, "I may not get there with you. I've been to the mountaintop and I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but you, my people, will get there." We're going to get there. We quarrel, teeth and tongue must bite. But at the end of the day, we got to keep on keeping on. And those who would like to keep us apart, we've got to walk past them. Martin Carter said, "And when that day comes, I shall rise again and walk out of this prison." Happy, happy, happy Dr. Walter Rodney Day. Go forth, sleep sound tonight, wake up to face the world tomorrow, because we have work to do. Good night, good night. Kwaheri, Jambo.